I have something to say, the little girl whispered, her voice trembling but carrying across the grand hall of the wedding venue in Seoul. The chandeliers above glimmered like frozen stars, casting warm light over rows of guests dressed in designer suits and sparkling gowns. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with polished mahogany and the subtle aroma of expensive perfume, creating a world far removed from the quiet apartment where Mia had spent her mornings preparing for this very moment. She clutched the microphone, feeling its cool metal against her small, dark hands, and inhaled deeply, letting her gaze sweep across the sea of astonished faces. At the center of the room, Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, sat with his back perfectly straight, his tailored black suit hugging his broad shoulders, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with an expression as unreadable as the calm surface of a midnight lake. Mia had seen him before, always commanding, always in control, and yet now, his eyes flickered with curiosity as he noticed her approach. Every step she took across the marble floor echoed softly beneath the polished arches, her sneakers whispering against the tiles, while the soft hum of a string quartet seemed to pause in the air as if holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The guests shifted in their seats, whispers rising like a current, and Mia felt her heart hammer against her ribs, each beat a reminder of the courage she had summoned from the quiet corners of her life. She thought of the times she had been invisible, the days she had swept floors and arranged flowers while no one so much as noticed her presence, and she felt a strange strength in being seen now, even if only for a moment. The wedding planner's delicate hands froze mid-adjustment. A flute of champagne paused in mid-air, and a hush fell over the hall as the young girl straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and let the words form on her lips. The soft rustle of silk and taffeta accompanied her measured breath, the collective attention of hundreds focusing on her tiny frame. In that instant, the immense power of Joon-Ho Kim seemed to converge into a single, quiet tension, his normally imperious demeanor softened by the unexpected vulnerability of this child standing before him. She thought about the rules she had learned. Long ago, the silent expectation to remain unseen, the lifetime of being underestimated, and she realized that those 7 words she was about to speak could alter the very rhythm of the world around her. The polished marble of the aisle seemed to stretch endlessly as Mia took her final step toward the microphone stand, her fingers tightening around the metal, and she felt the weight of every eye in the room, from the curious relatives in the front row to the security personnel stationed like shadows along the walls. The air was thick, almost tangible, with anticipation, and as she prepared to speak, the camera of her imagination captured every detail. The slight quiver of her lips, the glint of a diamond bracelet catching the light, the subtle rise of a breath held by the audience. She opened her mouth, the words flowing with a clarity that belied her small stature, and the room seemed to tilt ever so slightly, as if reality itself had paused, waiting for the impact of a truth so simple yet so profound. The wedding, with all its opulence and careful planning, hung suspended on the edge of her voice, each syllable poised to reshape the balance of power, respect, and attention in the grand hall. And for the first time, Mia felt the invisible threads of her own presence intertwine with the lives of those she had long observed in silence. The hall fell into an uneasy silence as Mia released the 7 words into the polished air, her voice small but unwavering, and the guests blinked, uncertain whether to gasp, murmur, or hold their breath. Every eye turned toward her, some filled with curiosity, others with a faint trace of amusement, not realizing that the amusement would not last. The chandeliers above continued to scatter light like a constellation brought indoors, their reflections dancing across the gleaming marble floor, catching the folds of satin gowns and the crisp lines of tailored suits. Joon-Ho Kim remained seated for a moment, the faint crease between his brows deepening as he processed the unexpected disruption to his meticulously arranged ceremony, his presence filling the room with a tension so palpable it pressed against the guests like an invisible hand. Mia stood still, her hands gripping the microphone, feeling a warmth spread across her palms, a mixture of adrenaline and resolve that made her tiny frame seem impossibly strong. Memories of her own quiet life in the servant quarters of the estate flickered through her mind. Early mornings spent polishing floors, afternoons arranging flowers and table settings, the weight of being seen as nothing more than a shadow among opulence. She had been invisible for so long that the attention now felt foreign, almost heavy, yet it carried a thrill of liberation. The guests began to stir, shifting in their seats, whispering to one another as the significance of the interruption slowly sank in. The bride, dressed in a delicate blush gown, froze mid-step, her bouquet trembling slightly in her grasp as she tried to follow the small figure at the microphone, eyes widening in disbelief. The groom, impeccably dressed in black and white, straightened, his posture rigid, sensing that the flow of the ceremony had changed, that the usual decorum and expectations had been challenged in a single, deliberate act. Mia inhaled slowly, letting her gaze travel across the room, pausing briefly on familiar faces who had always underestimated her, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in witnessing the flicker of surprise and discomfort that passed over them. The servers standing at the edges of the hall exchanged glances, their hands frozen, unsure whether to intervene or remain as witnesses to the extraordinary moment. A soft murmur of anticipation and confusion spread like a current through the guests, each one straining to understand the meaning and implication of the words that had halted the ceremony. In the center of it all, Joon-Ho Kim rose from his seat with deliberate slowness, the folds of his suit moving with a precision that mirrored the careful control he exercised over his life and empire, his gaze fixed on Mia, measuring, weighing, calculating the intention behind her actions. The tension was like a held breath in the air, thick with expectation, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer to hear what would come next. Mia, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and let the calm she had cultivated over years of quiet observation settle around her like a cloak. She had rehearsed this in her mind countless times, each scenario ending differently. Yet she found a courage in the unpredictability, in the knowledge that she was finally stepping beyond the role that others had dictated for her. The air seemed to vibrate with the delicate balance between anticipation and uncertainty, and even the faint clink of silverware and the whisper of silk were drowned out by the collective focus on the small, determined figure who had taken command of the room in a moment that no one could have predicted. In this suspended instant, the grand hall, with all its grandeur and meticulous planning, became a stage where the usual hierarchy was temporarily upended, and Mia, with nothing but her voice and presence, held the attention of the powerful, the wealthy, and the influential as the first real shift in the ceremony began to take shape. The 7 words hung in the air, their meaning not yet revealed, and the guests sat frozen, caught between curiosity and disbelief, the ornate hall seemingly suspended in time, as if even the chandeliers had stopped their gentle sway. Mia lowered the microphone slightly, her dark eyes scanning the crowd, noting the mix of reactions. Some whispered behind gloved hands. Others leaned forward in chairs, as if to catch a single syllable more clearly, and a few of the elderly guests clutched the arms of their seats, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. The bride's hand trembled on her bouquet, her perfect posture faltering for a brief instant, while the groom adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tightening, sensing a disruption to the meticulously planned ceremony that had been rehearsed to the minute. The soft clink of a fork against china echoed through the hall, yet it did not break the tension, for every eye was fixed upon Mia and the subtle authority she now commanded without even intending to. Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, stood in the center, his presence like a dark silhouette of control against the warm light, his gaze calm but alert, measuring the situation with the precision of a man accustomed to orchestrating every detail of his world. The hush in the room was almost complete, the distant hum of the string quartet, now a faint whisper as if the music itself were holding its breath, waiting to witness the ripple effect of the little girl's interruption. Mia felt the energy of the room press against her, the weight of hundreds of gazes assessing her every motion. Yet she found steadiness in the chaos, recalling the quiet strength she had nurtured through years of unnoticed labor, of hand-scrubbing floors and arranging objects that no one truly valued. In that memory, she drew courage, realizing that this moment, however fleeting, was hers to command, and as she straightened her back and lifted her chin, a subtle but undeniable confidence radiated from her, a light that contrasted with the shadow of expectation cast by Joon-Ho Kim. The guests shifted uneasily, the polished marble underfoot reflecting not only the light but also the growing tension, a mirrored stage for the unfolding drama, while the delicate scent of orchids and polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of the wedding feast, grounding the surreal moment in tangible reality. Mia's gaze met the eyes of a few familiar faces, those who had dismissed her presence countless times, and she noted their uncertainty, the slight falter in their expressions betraying that the carefully constructed hierarchy of the hall had been momentarily unsettled. Joon-Ho Kim took a deliberate step forward, the movement measured, controlled, yet carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience, his shadow stretching long across the floor, intersecting with the line of sight between Mia and the witnesses of her act. The subtle shifting of air, the rustle of fabric, and the faintest intake of breath from a neighboring guest seemed amplified, emphasizing the gravity of the small figure at the microphone and the power she wielded in a single, poised act. For Mia, each heartbeat resonated through her chest, a drum of anticipation and resolve, as she prepared for the next moment, the one that would either solidify her voice in the minds of everyone present or dissolve into silence. Yet she remained unmoving, grounded, and fully aware of the profound effect of standing in a space where opulence met innocence, authority met courage, and a single, unassuming voice could hold a room. The moment stretched, the 7 words lingering between each guest like a faint echo that refused to fade, and Mia felt a quiet power settle around her small frame, as if the polished marble floors beneath her feet had become a stage for something far greater than any ceremony could contain. The chandeliers overhead reflected the soft gold of the late afternoon light, catching the intricate folds of gowns and the sharp creases of bespoke suits. Yet all that opulence seemed secondary now, a backdrop to the unspoken tension that pulsed through the hall. Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, remained a statue of composure at the center of the room, yet a subtle shift in his posture suggested a recalibration, a silent acknowledgement that the balance he thought was certain had been interrupted by a child whose courage outshone the pomp surrounding them. Guests leaned slightly forward in their chairs, whispers fluttering like a cautious breeze, each person attempting to interpret the weight of what had been spoken, their attention unwavering, their movements slowed as though the room itself had been caught in a suspended heartbeat. Mia, feeling the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes upon her, allowed a steadying breath to escape, her chest rising and falling with quiet resolve, the memory of her daily routines of service, long unnoticed and taken for granted, lending her strength and clarity in this unprecedented moment. The bride, a vision in blush satin, paused mid-step, the bouquet in her delicate hands tilting ever so slightly, reflecting the surprise and uncertainty that rippled across the guests, while the groom adjusted his tie with precise, almost mechanical motions, betraying the tension that had gripped even the most practiced of ceremonial faces. The hall, filled with the scent of fresh orchids and polished wood, seemed to contract and expand with each shallow inhale of the audience, the faint strains of a string quartet reduced to the background, a quiet underscore to the drama that now unfolded not in orchestrated steps, but in the spontaneous, unassailable act of a single voice. Mia's gaze swept deliberately across the room, pausing on familiar faces who had long dismissed her presence, noting the subtle widening of eyes, the brief stiffening of posture, and the micro-expressions of disbelief that betrayed the recognition of her audacity. At the center, Joon-Ho Kim took a deliberate step forward, the motion slow, calculated, radiating authority, yet tinged with the faintest curiosity, as if measuring not only the words spoken but the resolve and character of the child who dared to speak. The soft rustle of silk, the gentle clink of fine china, and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of conversation faded into insignificance, leaving only the weight of attention focused on Mia, her small form amplified by the magnitude of her action and the anticipation it had generated. In that suspended instant, the hall, with all its grandeur, became a crucible where innocence and courage met power and expectation. And Mia, standing firm in her presence, understood the rare and profound effect of being fully seen, of having her voice recognized, of holding a room without a single concession to fear or hesitation. Each guest, from a youngest child perched on a parent's lap to the eldest matriarch whose hands rested lightly on the marble railing, felt the subtle reverberations of what had occurred. And in that collective pause, the carefully constructed order of the wedding became malleable, momentarily surrendered to the unexpected authority of the girl at the microphone. Joon-Ho Kim's gaze held her, steady, appraising, yet with a faint glimmer of approval, a silent acknowledgement that the moment had shifted and that the event, the ceremony, and perhaps even the perception of power itself, were now suspended in the wake of a small, deliberate act of courage that spoke louder than any spoken ritual could. The air in the grand hall hung heavy with anticipation, each guest frozen in a delicate balance of awe and uncertainty as Mia remained at the microphone, like ripples across the hall. Yet none dared to break the gaze fixed upon the child whose voice had drawn the attention of all present. Mia felt a quiet warmth of determination settle in her chest, the memory of countless days spent unseen and unheard providing a reservoir of strength that allowed her to stand tall amidst the ornate chairs, sparkling glassware, and carefully arranged floral arrangements that adorned the space. Each heartbeat echoed in her ears, a drum of resolve and presence, as she considered the delicate balance between action and observation, courage and caution, knowing that in this single moment, she held the power to shift perception and demand recognition not through volume, but through clarity and intent. The subtle movement of a server across the hall, the gentle adjustment of a decorative candle, even the faint rustle of silk dresses seemed magnified as the room collectively awaited the next gesture, each detail emphasizing the suspended tension. Joon-Ho Kim's shadow stretched across the marble as he took a deliberate step forward, his motion slow and precise, signaling both authority and a measured willingness to witness, to observe, and to engage with the audacity of the child before him. The soft strains of a distant string quartet provided a barely perceptible backdrop to the concentrated silence, a quiet score to the unfolding moment in which innocence and audacity intersected with power and control. Mia's gaze met a few familiar faces, those who had underestimated her before, and she noted the subtle shift in their expressions, the way their eyebrows lifted slightly, the brief straightening of posture that betrayed recognition of her resolve. In that intricate interplay of light, shadow, and human presence, the hall transformed from a venue of ceremony into a stage where courage, integrity, and the simple yet profound act of speaking truth to power commanded attention, holding the room in a delicate equilibrium between expectation and revelation, anticipation and understanding, as every soul in the space became a witness to the quiet assertion of dignity in the presence of authority, a reminder that even in the most controlled and orchestrated environments, the impact of genuine courage could resonate far beyond the confines of tradition, etiquette, and preordained roles. As the echoes of her words settled, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted perceptibly, each guest caught in the delicate suspension between surprise and comprehension, the soft, golden light reflecting off the chandeliers and bouncing across the polished marble floor in a way that seemed to heighten every subtle movement and expression. Mia, standing at the microphone, felt a quiet steadiness wash over her, a deep awareness of the power her presence now held, not through authority or wealth, but through courage and clarity, the kind that demanded attention in a world built upon hierarchy and expectation. Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, took a measured step closer, his dark eyes locking on Mia's small but unwavering figure, noting the determination in her posture, the calm that belied her age, and the intensity of her gaze, which seemed to reach beyond the physical confines of the hall and into the very intentions of those around her. Guests shifted subtly in their seats, some leaning forward in silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment, others exchanging quiet, uncertain glances as though seeking permission from one another to process what had just occurred. The bride clutched her bouquet with renewed awareness, her fingers tightening around the stems as her eyes followed Mia's deliberate movements, while the groom's hand remained poised, momentarily still, his normally confident posture tempered by the unexpected disruption of the ceremony he had anticipated would flow seamlessly. Mia allowed her gaze to travel across the room, observing not only the reactions of the attendees, but also the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and color that painted each expression with an almost cinematic quality. The gold of the chandeliers casting reflections in crystal glassware, the soft sheen of silk dresses rippling with the faintest movements, and the rich tones of polished wood providing a grounded contrast to the suspended tension. She thought of the countless mornings and evenings spent in quiet diligence, preparing tables, arranging flowers, and completing tasks unseen, and she felt an affirmation of a strength that had grown in those silent hours, a reservoir of presence that now manifested in the attention she commanded with nothing more than her words and her stance. Joon-Ho Kim, standing with a composed yet subtly shifting presence, radiated the duality of authority and curiosity. His sharp features softened ever so slightly as he absorbed the unexpected challenge posed by a child who had stepped forward where many adults might have hesitated, and in that briefest of moments, a new dynamic emerged between power and innocence, expectation and reality. The gentle rustle of fabric, the subtle clinking of fine china, and the distant, quiet hum of conversation receded to insignificance as the focus in the room converged entirely upon Mia, her voice, her eyes, and the weight of her singular act. Each heartbeat resonated within her chest like a drum of presence, each inhalation a silent assertion that courage, even in the smallest form, could influence the space around it, bending attention and acknowledgement without force or demand. The hall itself seemed to lean toward her, the grandeur of the ceremony transformed into a stage for authenticity and bravery, where the conventions of tradition and ceremony yielded, if only for a moment, to the impact of one deliberate, unflinching act. In that suspended balance, the guests, the bridal party, and even Joon-Ho Kim felt the subtle recalibration of authority, respect, and awareness. The room held in the fragile yet undeniable recognition that in the presence of truth spoken with clarity, even the most structured and opulent of environments could be reshaped by courage and integrity. The room remained suspended in a quiet tension, the opulent chandeliers casting a soft glow over the polished marble floor, each reflection mirroring the shifting emotions of the guests as they processed the bold act that had so unexpectedly interrupted the wedding. Mia stood at the microphone, small yet undeniably present, her dark eyes meeting the gaze of Joon-Ho Kim with a clarity that belied her age, and in that instant, the unspoken power of courage radiated from her, filling the hall with an energy that was at once fragile and commanding. The bride adjusted the delicate folds of her gown, her hands trembling slightly, and the groom shifted his stance, his posture rigid as he attempted to reconcile the disruption with the ceremony that had been planned down to the last detail. Whispers floated among the guests, a soft ripple of sound that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room, each voice caught between curiosity and apprehension, yet all held in check by the unyielding focus on the little girl whose presence had suddenly defined the space. The subtle scent of orchids mingled with the polished wood and the faint aroma of the celebratory feast, creating a sensory backdrop that emphasized the extraordinary nature of the moment, the contrast between ordinary expectation and the unforeseen assertion of character and dignity. Mia's mind traveled through memories of her own quiet, unnoticed life within the mansion. The early mornings spent polishing floors, the afternoons arranging delicate settings, the countless hours observing without being observed, and she drew strength from those experiences, realizing that the foundation of her courage had been built in the very moments when no one had acknowledged her. Joon-Ho Kim, standing with measured composure, observed her closely, noting the steadiness in her posture, the determination in her eyes, and the quiet confidence that allowed her to hold the attention of everyone in the hall, a child commanding a space meant for the powerful. The guests, sensing the subtle shift in authority, leaned forward, some instinctively adjusting in their seats, while others exchanged glances that conveyed a recognition of the significance of what had just occurred, a collective acknowledgement that the normal flow of power had been momentarily altered by an act of unassuming bravery. Mia's gaze swept deliberately across the room, meeting the eyes of familiar faces who had often underestimated her, and she noticed the brief widening of eyes, the slight straightening of posture, the subtle signs of realization that even the smallest voice, spoken with clarity and conviction, could command respect in a world structured by hierarchy and expectation. The soft strains of music from the string quartet provided a gentle backdrop, the notes weaving between the tension and stillness, emphasizing the emotional resonance of the moment as it unfolded in real time. Every detail, from the polished marble underfoot to the glint of light on crystal glassware, served as a frame for the unfolding recognition of courage and presence, the hall itself seeming to adjust to the weight of Mia's assertion. Joon-Ho Kim's expression shifted subtly, the tightness in his jaw softening as he processed the impact of the child's words, and in that brief exchange, a new understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that dignity and boldness, even in the smallest form, could influence the perception of power, commanding attention without threat or force. The hall, with its elegance and meticulous arrangement, had transformed into a space where authenticity and bravery took precedence over ceremony, and Mia, standing firm, felt the resonance of her actions ripple through the room, a reminder that courage could redefine expectation and inspire recognition, shifting the dynamic of even the most carefully controlled environment. The reaction in the hall was palpable, a collective intake of breath that seemed to ripple through the rows of guests, and Mia felt it resonate against her chest, a tangible acknowledgement that her words had altered the rhythm of the ceremony in a way no one could have predicted. The chandeliers above refracted light across the marble floors, creating patterns that danced along the edges of gowns and suits, emphasizing the subtle shifts in posture and expression among those present, while the soft scent of orchids mingled with polished wood and the delicate aroma of the celebratory feast, grounding the moment in sensory richness. Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, remained at the center of the room, his dark eyes unwavering as they met Mia's, a careful study of her resolve and composure, his broad shoulders held with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to control, yet momentarily challenged by the simplicity and impact of courage in action. The bride's fingers tightened around the stems of her bouquet, the tension in her posture betraying a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration, while the groom, usually the embodiment of composure, shifted slightly, his gaze flicking between Mia and the boss, recognizing the subtle change in the balance of attention and power. The guests leaned forward in their seats, some whispering to their neighbors, others holding their breaths, all caught in the fragile suspension of the moment, unsure whether to react or simply witness, their collective focus drawn entirely to the small figure at the microphone whose presence had transformed the atmosphere from ceremonial predictability to dynamic anticipation. Mia's mind traced back through the quiet moments of her life within the mansion. The early mornings spent polishing floors, the afternoons arranging tables and flowers, the evenings observing without being noticed, and she drew strength from the realization that all those hours had prepared her for this singular act of visibility, this assertion of presence that transcended age and stature. The subtle hum of the string quartet provided a gentle underscore to the heightened tension, the soft notes weaving through the space like a whisper of acknowledgement, harmonizing with the unspoken recognition of the importance of integrity and bravery. Joon-Ho Kim's measured step forward across the marble floor carried a weight that contrasted with the delicate lightness of Mia's small movements. Yet there was no intimidation in his approach, only the quiet assessment of someone witnessing. The strength of character displayed so unexpectedly. The guest's attention remained fixed, each individual responding to the energy of the room in nuanced ways. A slight widening of eyes, a subtle shift in posture, the barely perceptible lean forward that indicated engagement and contemplation. Mia's gaze, deliberate and calm, met those of the few who had often overlooked her, and she saw in them a fleeting acknowledgement, a silent admission that courage, even from the smallest among them, could command attention and respect in ways that power alone could not dictate. The hall itself, with its opulent decorations, polished surfaces and meticulous arrangements, seemed to bend around the moment, accommodating the quiet assertion of presence and integrity, transforming from a venue of ceremony into a stage where authenticity, bravery, and dignity reigned. And in that space, the collective awareness of everyone present was drawn into a shared experience, one that highlighted the profound impact of a single voice spoken with clarity, purpose, and unwavering courage. The hall remained suspended in a profound silence, the kind that stretched and held every sound, every movement, and every breath in a delicate balance. As Mia lowered the microphone and allowed the gravity of her 7 words to settle fully into the consciousness of everyone present. The chandeliers cast a soft, golden light over the polished marble, reflecting in the eyes of the guests who had been witnesses to a moment that shifted the expectations of the ceremony, and even the delicate floral arrangements seemed to lean toward the energy of the room, as if acknowledging the courage that had altered the course of the event. Joon-Ho Kim, the Korean Mafia Boss, stood tall, his presence commanding yet now tempered with a quiet respect, his dark eyes fixed on Mia with a complex mixture of admiration, surprise, and acknowledgement of the wisdom embedded in the simplicity of her statement. The bride and groom, frozen in mid-motion, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The meticulous plans of the day rendered secondary to the undeniable force of authenticity and courage that had entered their carefully constructed world. Soft whispers and quiet gasps threaded through the guests, each reaction a small note in the collective recognition that the usual hierarchy and decorum had been gently but firmly redefined by the voice of a child who had dared to be seen and heard. Mia's small figure radiated a still power, the result of years spent unseen, her presence now commanding attention not through force or intimidation, but through clarity, integrity, and a quiet insistence on being acknowledged. The polished marble floor mirrored the reflections of anxious guests and attentive staff alike, capturing each subtle gesture and micro-expression that conveyed understanding, surprise, and, in some, an awakening respect. The soft scent of orchids and polished wood mingled with the distant aroma of the celebratory meal, grounding the heightened emotion in tangible reality, each sensory detail amplifying the extraordinary significance of the moment. Joon-Ho Kim's careful, deliberate movements as he stepped closer through the hall were measured, controlled, yet each step resonated with the acknowledgement of the shift in dynamic, a subtle nod to the way courage and dignity, even from the smallest among them, could challenge authority and reshape perception. The guests, young and old, leaned forward instinctively, some with widened eyes, others with subtle shifts in posture, each aware that they were witnessing a rare intersection of bravery and presence, a moment in which the structure of the room and the ceremony itself yielded to the quiet force of authenticity. Mia's gaze swept across the space one final time, noting the mixture of reactions, the fleeting acknowledgement of those who had underestimated her, and the subtle but undeniable change in the room's energy, a collective recognition that even in the midst of opulence, hierarchy, and ceremony, courage and integrity could command attention and respect without a single demand. The string quartet played a gentle, measured note in the background, accentuating the suspended atmosphere, while the light from the chandeliers and candles seemed to dance in subtle acknowledgement of the moment, highlighting the faces of the attendees and reflecting the realization that the ceremony, and perhaps even the perception of authority itself, had been transformed by a single deliberate act of presence and truth. In that suspended instant, the grandeur of the hall became a stage not for ritual or expectation, but for the quiet, enduring power of courage, dignity, and the simple yet profound impact of being fully seen. And Mia, standing firm, understood that the reverberations of her action would linger far beyond the walls of the room, leaving a lasting impression of the strength that could emerge from the smallest voice spoken with clarity and conviction.